All right, welcome back to the breach report. This week we're going to talk about the Accellion breach. This is a really huge breach that has affected a lot of companies, and it's continuing to grow. Actually, right now as we speak, this is this is a new one. It's got new malware. It comes from a ransomware gang I hadn't seen before either, and it's kind of interesting what they're going after. So
Yeah, it is. And it's interesting because it's one that I've not really seen talked about much. Of course, we've seen the SolarWinds attack, obviously being taking a lot of headlines in the security world, but this one's actually starting to pick up a lot of steam. There's a lot of big companies that are starting to be named in this breach, so be interested to see some of the nuances of what's going on with all this.
yeah, it's getting really big really fast. So first up, I'm going to read kind of the overview here from Bleeping Computer. They did a lot of the research here. This comes from them. It says threat actors associated with financially motivated hacker groups combined multiple zero-day vulnerabilities and a new web shell to breach up to 100 companies using Accellion's legacy file transfer appliance and steal sensitive files. The attack occurred in mid-December 2020, involved the Clop Ransomware Gang and the Fin11 threat group. Unlike previous attacks by these groups, the Clop file encrypting malware was not deployed. It appears that the actors opted for an extortion campaign. After stealing the data, they threatened victims over email with making stolen information publicly available on the Clop leak site unless a ransom was paid. So this is something that's kind of interesting and different from these other ransomwares that we've covered. This is not a ransomware in that they're not actually encrypting their files and affecting them. What they've done is they've already breached the company, they've already stolen all the data, and now they're holding the data at ransom. So this is why we call it an extortion campaign instead, because it's, hey, we have your data and we'll leak it. So these companies can still work, so they don't have to pay a ransom here to get out of anything, or rather to get their files functioning again. They rather would pay to not have certain sensitive things made public. Now, what I'm
That's
seeing from a
becoming
lot of
very
these is they
popular,
stole.
by the way.
Oh yeah.
Sorry to cut you off. That form of an attack, that extortionware, is becoming very, very popular.
Yeah, and it's interesting about that because, ransomware doesn't always assume that the data has actually been exfiltrated, right? It may just be locked down. And I think honestly, cyber insurance and some other things are kind of driving that trend in that, they can kind of get their insurance to pay for, well, like, here's just pay the ransom, unlock our stuff, and we can continue on with business. Whereas here it goes, no, we've already breached you. We've already taken your data. Like, it's already happened. This is after the fact. So I think it's a little more exploitative, honestly.
Mhm.
Here I'm going to read off their ransom that they leave. Hello, your network has been hacked. A lot of valuable data stolen. There will be a short description of stolen data, including the total file size of compressed files. We are Clop Ransomware Team. You can Google news and articles about us. We are famous, right? We have a website where we publish news and stolen files from companies that have refused to cooperate. Here is the address, redacted.onion. So that's a Tor browser, Tor network, the Onion router. Use Tor browser or onion.dog, which is a mirror. That's interesting. I've seen the .dog before. We are visited by 20 to 30,000 journalists, IT experts, hackers, and competitors every day. We suggest that you contact us via chat within 24 hours to discuss this current situation. Give them a victim-specific URL to click on. Use Tor browser. We don't want to hurt. Our goal is money. We are also ready to provide any evidence of the presence of files with us. Wow, this is so. There's a lot of manipulation going on here. This is using a lot of kind of classic social engineering techniques here, right? So they talk about. So first they prove that we have your data. Here it is. This is the size of it. They talk about then, how likely their data is to be exposed. We have 20 to 30,000 hackers and IT experts who look at your stuff. So, trying to build this thing up that there's a very real risk that your data is going to get looked at unless you contact us. And then they kind of sign off with, um, this is really manipulative. Like, oh, we don't want to hurt you. We just want money, right? Like, there's almost something that like an actual kidnapper would do to somebody. It's a little bit sadistic. Um, so here's some of the targets here: Kroger, Singtel, QIMR Berghofer Medical Research Institute, Reserve Bank of New Zealand, the Australian Securities and Investment Commission, or ASIC, the Office of Washington State Auditor, SAO, That's a ton already. They didn't list it here, but there's all. Oh yeah, University of Colorado. We're going to talk about them as well. Uh, Technical services company ABS Group. You've probably seen their name out there somewhere. Law firm Jones Day, Fortune 500 Science and Technology Corporation Danaher, and geodata specialist Fugro. I hope I pronounced that right. Fugro. So that's a lot of big
And yeah,
institutions.
and by the way, that's just what they found so far, and that's, I think when I was first looking at this breach the other week, they had only uncovered maybe four at the
Yeah.
time,
Yep.
and so this thing is just starting to unravel.
And did they? I don't think they mentioned it yet. Yeah, December. So mid December 2020 is when it first happened. So it's about 3 months ago now. Pretty typical lag time there, and we just learned about Kroger like this week. So I mean, it's pretty new. A lot of stuff's going on. 73 gigabytes of data. Not actually that much when you think about it. And this is something we're going to touch on with the ones that we dive into. Is a lot of these breaches are single digit percentile data breaches, and makes it, maybe it's targeted. We'll see. Um, so what I first want to jump on is what's cool about this, right? Is we have 0 days. So we have CVE 2021s, and there's a new web shell. New web shells are always fun because you can do all kinds of great stuff with those. So we have CVE 2021 dash 27101 through 104. These four CVEs do a number of things here. 27101 is a SQL injection via a crafted host header. Then it's an OS command execution via local web service call. SSRF, which is server side request forgery via crafted post request. And 27104 is an OS command execution via a crafted post request.
Yeah, so I have two questions on that. So one, you mentioned the 0 days. How typical is it for an organization like this, a gang, not a nation actor, to have access to that many 0 day vulnerabilities, to know about them, right? And then two, break down these CVEs a little bit, because there's a lot there, but I first want to unpack the whole 0 day aspect, because
Yeah,
it, you don't just get your hands on a 0 day, let alone multiple.
it takes a lot of work. I mean, you can create them. I mean, what these guys are doing is reverse engineering or purchasing 0 days typically. And to answer your question, how often is it? Unfortunately, more and more common, like less uncommon than you'd think and you'd hope. Maybe 5 years ago that wouldn't have been the thing. Like if you saw multiple 0 days, you were pretty sure it was an APT. Now, these are a threat actor that they've seen before. This has already been attributed. They've been tracked by FireEye, as you can see, 2582, and there's this other one, Fin11. So, as far as I could tell, looking at these, they're not attributed to a nation. They are just a cyber gang. But these days, I worked with a dude. His job was reverse engineering. He did it for the blue team side, but I mean, he was one man, and he could probably write, 2 or 3 0 days by himself. And if you get five of those guys, who are highly motivated and are making money on this, because I mean, you only need to make $100,000 one time to really support a small cyber gang like that for a while, really, especially if they're in a, a country where $100,000 is going to go a lot further than it will than maybe in the United States or a major country, right?
Yeah. Crazy to
So,
think that 30 people,
oh yeah,
whatever a gang size is, but a handful of people could take down, not take down, but like sting a corporation.
I mean it's a big hurt. So these 0 days they created, these CVEs here. So it's a SQL injection, OS command execution via local, and a crafted post request and a server side request for forgery. So it looks like what they're doing is they're using a SQL injection vulnerability. This crafted host header is the header you'd see in an HTTP request, right? Like when you contact the server via that protocol. So one of the headers in there is host, and that has to It has to match the host that you're connecting to, or else some security things are going to let it work. It's required after HTTP 1.1. So it's interesting that they're able to get one that worked and get through there. So that's cool. So there's a SQL injection there. They've got two that are OS command execution. That's hopefully exactly what it sounds like. It's you can tell the operating system underneath to do something. For example, if you had a Linux under there, you could tell it to run services or start things or stop things. Just it allows you to do anything really on there. One's this local web service call, so that means it's something that's going to be on the intranet side, telling other devices along the side what to do. And the crafted post request, again, it's the HTTP post request, and a post request is one that you make when you're submitting a form to a website, right? So if I go to the website here and want to see what I want to read, that's called a get. Now, if I submit data, that's a post. So they're submitting an operating system command, like you would like a CMD command or a Linux bash shell command through that HTTP request. And then with that, they've got this server side request forgery. So they have to have some kind of knowledge of the underlying system of what it's doing, so they can actually forge a request from the server inside to other places within the network. Basically, what this all boils down to is they're commanding this appliance, this FTA, which is a file transfer appliance, to do things, anything, execute code. And it looks like what they did with this was they used it to, exfiltrate data. So with the SQL injection, you've got a database there. You can pull the data. You can do whatever you want at that point when you're able to do these four things. And then with this, we've got this do mode web shell, which is a new web shell. It's always fun to get new web shells. There's some popular ones out there like Meterpreter, but this might be interesting to play with in the future. This is where they actually use to steal the data. So what the web shell does is this is the interface that allows you to then connect to it from your desktop PC and wherever, and pull data off it like you would your own personal FTP server, for example, or your own personal SQL server. It basically just gives you the backdoor access into their database.
So you just write a little PowerShell script, and then you just send it out and just call that information back to you.
Essentially, yeah. So like, there's like PS exec is one you could use against Windows. One I've done before using the Eternal Blue, which is one the SA invented for SMB on Windows.
Mm-hmm.
With that, you could actually, you open a web shell, and with that web shell, you can run malware essentially on it. With that, I was able to get root and just say, "Who am I?" It says, "Oh, you're NT authority." So that's root access on a Windows machine through that web shell. That was my backdoor in there. And then with that, you can access the C drive, right? You can access everything as root. So it's something similar to that here with a
Mm-hmm.
database server. So what's funny is to continue the kind of manipulation, if the victim did not respond to the initial threats, they sent another one. This is the last warning. If you don't get in touch today, tomorrow we create a page with screenshots of your files like the others on our site. And here's all the different ways you can get a hold of us, right? Use Tor browser. So trying to help you. They're being, they don't want to hurt you. They just want to help you. Um,
No,
so
they
they're,
want your money.
yeah. And so real quick, something we want to talk about, as is always the case in here, analyzing the extortion emails, the researchers found that some of the IP addresses and email accounts have been used by Fin11 in phishing operations between August and December. So how do you imagine they got their foothold?
Mm-hmm.
It's always this, man.
Someone clicks on something, you just
Don't
never
click
know.
the links. So yes, somebody, clicked links. They were able to gather some kind of data through that. It doesn't always have to be credentials. Could be, names of file shares or whatever. Then they use their SQL injection to get a web shell and start extracting data. So Accellion has something to say about all this. They gave us a pretty large update here.
Real quick before you go into the update, Josh,
Yeah,
who is Accellion? What do they do? Who are they? They're a software company, right?
sure. So they say they're the provider of the industry's first cyber or enterprise content firewall. So an enterprise content firewall is kind of what it sounds like. It's firewall that's specifically in place to protect like a content delivery system or like a CDN, right? Something like
Okay.
that would go through there. Or if you've got APIs, it can stand in an API gateway. So it's meant for um, basically it's meant to protect data in motion in an enterprise environment.
So it's a step up from just like your basic URL content filtering.
Right. So it's more about data behavior. It's not really filtering. So it's looking at sessions created, where it's trying to go, who's making the requests, whether or not the file matches this types. Maximum file size is allowed, minimum file size is allowed, file types. It
So it's looking for some type of signatures out there, and then it's
yeah.
using some type of data analysis and
And if you said
figuring
your
that out.
content was all JSON, right, then you could configure one to say, look, we're only allowing JSON data, and if you start getting requests for Perl data,
Hmm.
PHP data, it's just going to block that kind of stuff. That's a pretty basic example of one of its functions, but it's
Okay.
it's focused on that.
Okay. So Accellion, they have this web. I'm assuming it's a web-based content firewall, this enterprise firewall. And they are the front lines defense for a lot of these organizations, preventing these malicious intruders from getting in. They get hacked. This is their statement, but they're a security company. I just want to stress that they are a security company that got hacked. This is another situation where you have a supply chain attack on a security company.
SolarWinds. It's
SolarWinds,
another
SolarWinds,
SolarWinds.
SolarWinds. But it's also, I think, like the third security company that we reported. There was the
At
French
least.
company
Oh yeah,
from the breach report before. So it's
Storm Surge. Yeah.
they're looking for footholds, and security companies, I, maybe software companies in particular that sell security services, seem to be pretty lucrative targets for them.
Yeah, I think it's just a natural progression of where things. I mean, people are going to have security software, so why not just go there, right? It's something people are going to have. So it can kind of guarantee you results if you're able to do it. It's probably harder, bigger risk, bigger reward. So this particular attack was against Accellion FTA file transfer appliance. It's a 20-year-old product nearing end of life. All FDA customers were promptly notified of the attack on December 23rd, 2020. At this time, Accellion has patched all known FDA vulnerabilities exploited by attackers and has added new monitoring and alerting capabilities to flag anomalies associated with these attack vectors. So they are on top of it. Um, what's again interesting is seeing legacy stuff out there. Old stuff getting attacked, which is pretty common.
Mhm.
It's easier. It's been around for a long time. Then you know a lot more about it. People have had time to reverse engineer it and build things for it.
And an FTA in this situation, it's kind of like a file transfer, like an FTP.
Yeah, file transfer appliance. So it's yeah, it's like an FTP. It's more advanced. Something that would sit and act as like the central appliance for moving data around. See, I can think of maybe a bad analogy. It's like, okay, like a print server, right? At some point when an enterprise gets big enough, you're going to need a centralized server for that,
Mm.
right? So you got a print server, you've got, you might have remote desktop servers as well. So you have a file transfer appliance. Similar thing is its main
So
job is
they're
moving data.
attacking like the main data highway.
Yep, the main
Gotcha.
data hub.
Okay.
Yep.
My analogy is better than yours.
Yes, it is. Hey, my wife says I suck at analogies. I agree. So.
I would agree with your wife.
So big thing here is, Excellion's on top of it, which is great. They identified it right away, they patched it as soon as they could, and they've introduced the monitoring. So there's also an advantage of having software that's been around for a long time. If it's your software, is you kind of know a lot about it too. You probably know more than the attackers do about it, and you'd probably be able to fix it faster if you're trying. Some people don't try.
Doesn't hurt that you're a cybersecurity company yourself too, right?
Right.
You
And so,
understand the
yeah,
nuances behind getting stuff done quickly, and the
exactly.
turnaround times, and yeah.
So yeah, that's the concept. Be your own customer, right? If you're a
Mm.
cybersecurity company, it's something that some companies had to learn the hard way. But it's good to see Excellion's doing the right thing here. Um, All right, so let's talk about some of their major customers who are hit here. So the first one is Singtel, which is Singapore Telecom, which is another very popular target. How many of those have we seen in these breach reports already?
Yeah,
Is telecoms.
we've talked about telecoms a few times.
So Singtel says it is investigating the impact of a cybersecurity breach that may have compromised customer data after it ascertained on February 9th that, quote, files were taken. The attack had affected a file sharing system developed 2 decades ago by a third party vendor, Accellion, FTA, we just talked about that, which the Singapore telco had used internally and with external stakeholders. This comes to us from ZDNet. So again, internally and external stakeholders. So now we have third parties with third parties being affected. This is a pretty common thing too. It's that whole chain, right? There's a lot of chain links. There's you know fourth parties. I mean, we've gone beyond the third party line, probably a decade ago in IT services now. We've got third parties who are also using things developed by other third parties, and so if you're the further back you can go with these attacks, the longer, the further down the chain you can get.
You know what that reminds me of? That reminds me of the networking effect, like the social media networking effect, where if you're connected, and this is just random number, just for the example, if you're connected to 10 people on a social platform, your potential connections could be 1,000 people, right? Because they
Right.
have friends of friends that are recommended to you, and then you connect with them, and then it's a friend of a friend of a friend that connects to you, maybe, but that's kind of the same situation here, where you get a handful of companies get attacked, and then it just snowballs, and then it becomes 18,000 people, customers impacted with SolarWinds case.
Yeah. So just going to give a quick little side thing on that. What you're talking about there is really knowledge transfers. It's a big part of that. And it's got a similar effect with data transfer as well. So there's a book on this called Sapiens that it's more focused on, like, the human side of that, but it has a lot to do with data as well. And it's about how the more nodes you add in a system allow data or knowledge to transfer faster and spread wider, but you can also apply that to malware,
Mm-hmm.
and data anyway. So, um, Sapiens, good book. So the impact here on Singtel was fewer than 50 customers, which I mentioned earlier. There's some really small attacks. I'm not really sure why they're so small. Um, it's interesting. They were pretty threatening about it, and I don't know if it was just this due to the speed or what.
Maybe they knew what they were looking for that was going to give them the biggest payout, right? So it's like
Maybe.
if they knew where the crown jewels of the unmentionables are,
Right.
and then they just have to flash that one proof of concept that they stole, whatever data it was, or whatever information. Maybe that's enough to spur the information, or
Like whaling,
them into
basically.
action. It's like, why would I steal everything when I can just steal a handful of things that we know is going to get you to actually pay us? Like they even said themselves that at the end of the day, we just want your money.
Right. Whaling. I mean, yeah, you're talking
Yeah.
about whaling. Going after the big ones. So yeah, sure. Just get this, the C-suites data. That's probably pretty motivating by itself, right?
Or I mean, anything that could compromise the organization as a whole,
Yeah.
or could put them in a negative light. Like these big organizations, especially big brands, they're very conscientious of their reputation and how they're perceived, because especially when you look at like consumer packaging companies and some other, nuanced brands like that, where um, brand is everything, and
Yeah.
anything that tarnishes it could
Bad
down the
PR.
line, yeah, it could down the line, it could have, $100 million implication, for example.
That's a very good point. Brand damage is a big part of risk. So, if the data that they share is, maybe one thing, but one very, you know, something that the public wouldn't really like, that could be huge to brand damage, for a long time. So, yeah, maybe that's what it is. They're obviously not going to tell us exactly what's been ransomed from these companies. We can speculate, but judging by kind of the breadth of the attack and how small the data is, I'd say it's likely it's either whaling or just the fact that they patched it so quickly. We may never know, but maybe maybe on a non-recorded session we could go dive out there and see if we can find some information and ascertain that for ourselves. Do some actual threat research out there. One thing that's interesting from this ZDNet article about the Singtel is that they said the patches rolled out did not effectively plug the holes. So they said the fix was first deployed on December 24th, while the second and final patch was applied on September 25th, and no further fixes were released since. So
And
it
then
sounds like it took a little bit. Yeah.
And then another one, January 30th, to plug another hole.
Yep.
So this was something that.
Okay, so the December 27th one was ineffective.
So like you mentioned, this was legacy software. This brings up a really good point about using legacy software. Waiting the last minute to switch. I don't know the specifics behind when you would use this particular software or the use case for these companies. Maybe they had a good use case for it, but typically speaking, if you have something that's end of life, are they giving as much attention to it on the vulnerability side?
Yeah, so they did some interesting things with this here. The telco said they then took the FTA system offline after the January 23rd fix was pushed out, because obviously they'd lost faith in it, right? So subsequent patch then came out on the 30th to plug a new vulnerability, which Singtel said then triggered an anomaly alert when efforts were made to deploy it. Accellion then informed them that the system could have been breached, and this had likely occurred on January 20th. So it's after the actual patch happened. We continue to keep the system offline and activated cyber and criminal investigations that confirmed the January 20 date. Given the complexity of the investigations, it was only confirmed on February 9th that files were taken. So to kind of step back and piece this together, there were some vulnerabilities found by Accellion. They pushed out patches through the end of December. Those patches were ineffective. A new patch came out later after that December 27th. So between December 27th and January 30th, there was kind of a lapse where they were sitting with basically a failed patch. And on January 20th is when this data breach occurred. So it seems like what happened here is, they rolled out a patch, then they rolled out the information that the patch didn't work, and somehow this cyber group was sitting. They were able to get that information pretty quickly and act quickly and breach these companies in that lag time using the failed patch. That's pretty sophisticated. It's interesting.
Yeah, it makes me wonder if they had some line of communication inward.
So
whether they were already in there or.
I think going back to this, let's see.
So it sounds like at least.
I think didn't they just mention that it was further back that they actually were hit with these. So it's probably they were probably doing something similar to SolarWinds, where they were actually able to sit in their CI/CD pipeline and react to it. Let's see. I guess it's not here. Maybe I misread that. Anyway, so we'll move ahead to the next one. University of Colorado. They were also hit by this, again with the FTA. Provide a large file transfer service used primarily by faculty, staff, and researchers. So there's going to be some good information in there, to your point of specific targeted data, faculty, staff, and researchers, not student data. So they're financially motivated, but it seems like they're financially motivated not to steal financial data, but to ransom important data, extort them for important data.
Or maybe they're selling research. Who knows?
Yeah, I mean,
we don't know if they're giving this information back, or even if they do, who they're giving that information to afterwards. I mean, they have the data, right?
Yeah, exactly.
They're gonna, if their goal is to maximize their money, then they would ransom it to the person, and then sell it off to someone else on the side. Because if you're the person being extorted, you don't, right? You don't have, you can't do anything about it, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, once it's already been, that's the thing, is once data exfiltration has happened, it is too late, right? You have dropped your ID card at some, random building, right? It's too late. Somebody can see it. So with University of Colorado, it's 447 users. Again, all staff and research, so small. Seems more and more likely that it was targeted. I mean, they only had a week really to do it, but it doesn't
Hmm.
take a week to exfiltrate that
I'd
much
be
data, really.
interested to know what, um, I mean, all those users, faculty and staff, it's kind of broad, but I'd be interested to know like what lines of research they're into, if there was anyone that was doing any type of interesting research, or if it was driven in that way. If there was anything that,
Well,
I don't
it's
know.
actually good that the next one we were going to talk about is
Yeah.
QIMR, because they're a medical research institute. So
Oh, there
again,
you go.
research, yeah. Um,
Key themes.
Research is really valuable for the institutions. I mean, that's intellectual property. I mean, research that you've published is literally a culmination of a lot of man hours of
Mm-hmm.
people working. Like, that's extremely valuable data. Once again, it's a small single percentile, 4%. So it says QMIR, Berghofer Medical Research Institute, is investigating a likely data breach through the third-party file sharing system Accellion. Early internal investigations indicate that about 4% or 620 megabytes of the QIMR Berghofer data in Accellion appears to have been accessed through the file sharing system on 25th of December 2020. 9 employees used the Accellion system. That's even smaller. 9 employees,
Mm-hmm.
620 megabytes of data. They don't really specify again who these employees are, but only 9 employees using this file transfer system at a research institute tells me that they're probably higher up, right? Because they're probably sending accumulating data. I'm completely speculating,
Well,
but
I
it's
wonder
small,
what how much access they had, right?
right?
So maybe they knew that they were going to target those people, and they had good access to that, and they only wanted to target those 9 people,
Right.
or those were the only 9 people they could target, so they just went with them. There's just so many different speculation to this, that
Yeah.
there's so much speculation to it that you could go down the route of, this could be some terrorism, espionage, government stuff, and that, no, actually it's just a bunch of people who want money. They told you what they wanted. They just want money.
Right. Yeah, it says only 9 employees have access to it, which is a pretty small system. So here it gets almost, so it says the CVs, the curriculum vitae of about 30 current and formula research staff were also in Excellion and cloud and could potentially have been accessed. They're not
Mhm.
confirming that. That is an interesting one though, right there, right? Um, Current and former research staff. So if you get access to an HR system, you also get access to any kind of resumes that are stored in that system. And it could even be people you didn't hire, right? So now I'm going to scare everyone
Yeah.
about, like, oh my God, don't apply because your data's going to get stolen.
Well,
But
I mean,
no, I'm
it's your
just,
resume. Your resume is
yes.
pretty much out there,
It,
right?
it should be only public data. So maybe that's what our security tip is here.
Hmm.
Your CV shouldn't include, you don't need your home address, okay?
Yeah.
Honestly, and if you're an employer, stop, don't ask people to put their home address. Nobody needs
So,
that. We don't mail stuff anymore. So email address, phone number, maybe, you know uh, depending on the type of interview you're looking for and whatever, but email address, phone number, and your name and your skills. Don't embellish. You don't need to talk about anything personal on your resume, because again, that's data you're putting out there. So
yep, and they'll just extort you.
yep. uh, so they're saying that we are very concerned that some data appears to have been accessed, and I want to say a sincere sorry to our stakeholders, particularly our clinical trial partners and members of the public who took part in our anti-malarial drug trials. These trials participants do a wonderful community service by helping to speed up the development of new drugs for a disease that kills about 400,000 people a year. We don't believe that any of the information in Accellion could be used to identify any of these participants, but nonetheless, I want to apologize sincerely that some of their de-identified information could potentially have been accessed. So, okay, so there we go. That's got a little more insight, right? It's trial participants for malaria drugs. that's proprietary data. That would definitely be some important stuff that you would want to ransom, I think. Maybe not so much about the personal data of those participants, but just what
No,
if the
you sell
trial
it to a
doesn't go well?
competitor.
Yeah,
Sell it
or
to a
yeah,
competitor.
yeah, oh,
Yeah,
anything. Right, right.
yeah, that's a big market, right?
Wow.
Anything in medical these days is a big market.
Yeah, I think the picture's really starting to come together with this here. So here's another one: Office of the Washington State Auditor.
Okay.
So Washington State Auditor is another financial government body. So they don't give us a whole lot of. This is basically a giant boilerplate of saying that we were breached. They don't claim very much about. Okay, here we go. 1.6 million people. So that's kind of a bigger breach. Personal information, the people who filed for unemployment claims in January 1st to December 10th, 2020. This group includes many state employees as well as people whose identity was used to file for claims fraudulently in early 2020. Oh, interesting. SEO auditors were reviewing all claims data as part of an audit of that fraud incident. This affects about 1.6 million people. Okay, so SEO is doing an audit on fraud, a fraud that happened in 2020, and that data was accessed through this Accellion FTA breach. And that affects about 1.6 million people. So there's no telling exactly what was taken out of that, but that one's much bigger. It's probably the biggest, the most amount of people it's affected of all these.
In one scenario, yeah.
Right, right.
Interesting. So we have a malaria drug research company. We have people who are applying for unemployment benefits in the state of Washington. We have a telecom.
Yep.
Was there any? Is there anything specific on this one?
Nothing else. I mean, what are they doing about it? Same thing as, they're getting patches. They're a state government, so they've gotten in touch with the state cybersecurity
Yeah.
officials, law enforcement, legal counsel.
So
Typical
yeah,
stuff.
so we have that. We have the state government, and then we have Kroger. So
Kroger.
here goes
Yeah.
our theory.
Right. Yeah. So, well, I mean, Kroger's kind of a behemoth in supermarkets. I
Oh,
mean,
they're huge.
they're
Yeah,
no Walmart, but they are huge, especially in the South. So
they're one of the
grocery
largest
chain.
chains in the country.
Oh yeah, they're huge. So what they say here is grocery chain Kroger on Friday. This is Friday the 20th, just 2 days ago. Became the latest to reveal it was affected by a breach. No credit or debit card information or customer account passwords were affected by this incident. So again, it's not affecting the end customers. Um, this is what's I think unique about this Kroger story, though. Kroger said it has since discontinued the use of Accellion services, reported the incident to federal law enforcement, and initiated its own forensic investigation.
Hmm.
They fired Accellion.
Wow, completely. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That's
Uh,
interesting. Well, I mean, so there could be a couple of reasons, but I mean, at face value, it's like your brand and your reputation as a security company, right? Like if you get breached, that's what happens. People are going to fire you. So there's always going to be that potential. I'm sure in SolarWinds case there was as well. But we also know that it was a legacy application that they were using.
yep.
So, you know, maybe this just kind of accelerated things for them. Maybe I don't know if they had some other deal in the works for a replacement, but yeah, I mean, it's like
It'll
it
certainly help the decision.
doesn't yeah, it does certainly doesn't look good for Excellion, is
No.
what I would say.
I mean, we talked about brand damage, and this is a tangible example of that right there.
Yeah.
I mean, we're not saying for sure that Kroger doesn't trust Accellion anymore, but that for the time being, they don't trust this product anymore, right? They've gotten
Hmm.
rid of it because it's been hacked. And I'm sure if we look more into SolarWinds again, there's gonna be companies who are doing the same thing with SolarWinds. They're gonna be severing their contracts there. This is a serious risk for these cybersecurity companies. So, you know, even though Accellion says right here, the company said it resolved the vulnerability and released a patch within 72 hours to the less than 50 customers affected. The 50 customers being customers who also have crap loads of customers like Kroger.
Hmm.
But sure, they reacted quickly, they shut it down, but it's too late. Again, it's too late, right? The data's gone, the damage is done, and people are going to stop using this legacy service. That
Yep.
is really the worst case scenario, because you're losing future business and you're losing current business. And if you had to pay the ransom for anything, you've also just lost money right now.
Hmm.
It's it's a triple whammy. They keep calling this, like an isolated incident, involving just a few customers, but or a standalone system. I mean, yeah, it's isolated to one system, but it's that interconnectivity, I think, that kind of breaks down your classical thought process there of like isolated incidents, because it's really not. Uh, it's isolated to one system, but that system affects millions of people, as we saw with the Washington State thing, right?
Yeah, it's that we talked about this at the beginning. That risk of being, I guess, more of a software-based security company, where you kind of open yourselves up to this type of situation, versus if you're more, I guess, more of a managed service, like a SOC type of company.
Right. So, well, the rest of this article actually kind of goes back and talks about University of Colorado. The others we already covered. This comes to us from Compliance Week. Thank you, Compliance Week. Here's Kroger's official statement. A little more data they gave here is: at this time, based on the information provided by Accellion and its own investigation, Kroger believes that less than 1% of its customers, specifically customers of Kroger Health and Money Services, have
Hmm.
been impacted. In addition, current and certain former associates will be notified that certain HR records have been impacted. Okay, so a pattern again. We've got health, financial, and HR records. We've got it's research and medical research and
You know what I
financial
bet
data.
Kroger does? I bet they have a pharmacy.
Oh
I
yeah.
bet that pharmacy talks to doctors, and I bet that, like, yeah, the medical thing is very interesting.
Well, they do money services too. I mean, you can
That's
pay
true.
bills through Kroger. You can. I mean, it's.
Oh yeah, that's
I
true.
think they have some
Wire
things similar
payments.
to how Costco. You can like. You can buy houses through Costco. You can do financing through them. Kroger has smaller stuff, but there's some similar things too.
It's absolutely true. Yeah, and then you pair that with Washington State, with all of the unemployment records, or the people that were filing for unemployment. Yeah, it's
Yep.
very interesting. I don't know what exactly the play is there. I think you have
So
another one though, right?
I do, and we're really going to drive this point home. And I think with this, it's really going to paint the picture of what these guys are trying to do. Australian corporate regulator, the Australian Securities and Investment Commission, or ASIC, on Monday disclosed a security incident that involved Accellion software. So first, I'm going to read this from Security Week here. An independent commission of the Australian government, ASIC, is the national corporate regulator overseeing enterprise and financial services, and also tasked with the enforcement of laws designed to protect consumers, creditors, and investors in Australia. So this is sort of like a hybrid SEC and consumer protection body of the Australian government. So, although not directly is involved in like stocks and stuff, it seems. But again, financial.
Hmm.
uh, so it's got data on consumers and creditors and major corporations. They say there's no evidence that license application forms or attachments were accessed or downloaded, but notes that there is some risk that some limited information may have been viewed by the threat actor. So
It seems like they're a little bit more locked down, right?
yeah,
So it seems like no data appears to have been accessed or downloaded.
yeah,
They're
credit license
continuing the
application.
investigation.
So it's the credit license process specifically that was attacked. So maybe they're trying to open up fraudulent credit. It's worth
Oh.
noting that Australia has really really good consumer protection laws
Hmm.
and also very good data protection laws. I'm a little jealous.
Yeah, they've gone full force on that,
They do.
which is good.
They
Well,
yeah.
it can be bad too, but in this case, that's good.
Yeah, there's some pretty interesting things with Australians consumer protection laws out there. They take care of their people on that side of things really well. So here this actually comes from ASIC here. This is a little bit longer statement. So They say that on December 28th, 2020, an unidentified threat actor accessed an ASIC server containing attachments to Australian credit license applications submitted to ASIC between 1 July 2020 and 20th of December 2020. So about 6 months worth of data here. Cyber incident occurred to a vulnerability in the FTA. Yeah, we already know that. ASIC engaged independent cyber experts to undertake a forensic investigation. Their analysis has confirmed there is no evidence that the attachment to credit license applications have been read or downloaded. This has not changed. So it seems like this is probably the most limited of the incidents here. They did a really good job of locking this down, and they probably already had some good protections in place already. They have the Privacy Act of 1988 down there. That's theirs. Here's what they've done. They disabled the server. It's good. They ascertained that no IT infrastructure is impacted. They provide alternative arrangements for submitting attachments, so they've got their business going. Written to all identified credit license applicants, address the incident in accordance with their law, informed relevant authorities, and engaged independent cybersecurity experts to complete a forensic investigation. So this is a great example of exactly what you should do.
Mm-hmm.
Um, First step is turn that sucker off so it stops hitting everybody and infecting everyone. And actually, let me rephrase that. Disable, not turn off, meaning get rid of all of its connections to everything, and yeah, maybe turn it off for a little bit, but don't wipe that thing out right away. So I heard a story recently about somebody dealing with the SolarWinds attack, and their response was just wipe out the server before they did any investigation or anything like that. So then they were left blind. They had no idea where they were impacted, which is not the right response. So disable it, then ascertain what's been impacted, right? You have
Yeah.
to start that investigation.
And it's really important, just to piggyback off what you just said, it's really important to know how you are impacted because that helps to prevent attacks from happening in the future. That's one of the main reasons. I mean,
Yes.
obviously, you're curious, you want to know what happened, but the primary goal when you're responding to these types of incidents, you want to know how the attackers got in because then you want to fill that gap.
Yeah.
That's one of the first things you want to do.
Only one step of the incident response process is deleting and you know getting rid of stuff. That's the cleanup. That's the last step once everything is done. So you definitely need to investigate. You cannot get rid of your data. That is vitally important. Like you must keep those logs, even though it's like, yeah, you have this box with a nasty, scary malware on it. Unplug all of the network cables, but don't delete it. Um,
Yeah. So it
you
looks like ASIC really followed all of the good procedures here, and they were,
they
as a
did
result,
perfect.
they had minimal to no impact, whereas some of these other organizations we saw had impact from
Right.
1% scale to 1.6 million people.
Yeah. Um, yeah, and this is a good one here is, they provided alternate arrangements. So even though they just so they had no interruption really about this. They're like, oh, boom, disable, set up something. I'm sure it was a little bit disruptive, but it's not like SolarWinds where they crippled that one, that logistics company for weeks.
Yeah.
You
To
know,
be honest, though, for a government agency, this is something I would expect.
yeah.
For the type of data they handle, for the sophisticated controls that they should have in place, this is the type of response I would expect.
Yeah, that's really what everyone should do.
Oh yeah,
It's not that hard though. It's not if you've got something mature already set up in place. If you have somebody taking care of your incident response, if you've got
that's the
monitoring,
issue, though.
yeah.
That's the issue, though. It's if you have something already set up in place. That's the issue.
If you
People
don't,
don't
then
already
you're
do.
already losing this
Well,
war.
yeah,
I mean,
but that's
really.
not. But how do you start a conversation with someone who says you can't get someone to invest in security when you say you're already losing, right? You
Well,
have
no,
to
you're right.
have a basis point to start at. But
So
so
let's. That's a good point. Really, it's about this risk mitigation, right? I mean, some of these
mhm.
companies had very little risk. Some of these companies probably had a lot more risk, like the 1.6 million impacted it by the state of Washington. So not you're not going to want to implement everything if your risk is not as great, and that's where things get hard with this conversation is right is how much do you invest into putting up the security versus what's the actual risk of what you're trying to protect.
Yeah, that's really important. You have to do that analysis. It doesn't make sense, you know, spending $1 million to secure a server that's only bringing, only has $50,000 worth of IP on it or something like that, or data or
Right.
value to the organization. You should always know what the value of your data is.
Yes, knowing the value of your data, that's a good point. Not only where it is, but yeah, what's the actual classification and value of it? Is it public realm? Is it, private data? And what's
Yeah.
the impact of that
What's the
data
dollar
being
value?
used?
I mean,
Yeah,
that's you can have the impact, even from like a branding perspective and all of this. But what's the
it's
succinct
dollars.
dollar
Yep.
value? If you had to replace it tomorrow, what would the manpower hours be? How do you calculate that into a dollar figure? So I want to just kind of wrap this all up here, Josh. Um, all we have several organizations impacted, governments, telecommunications, different industries. Um, in this case, the entire attack started with from a security company. What are these organizations going to be doing about this ransomware? Do you think they're going to be paying it, or that's always kind of like the first question. It's like, do you think they're going to pay? And it's always kind of hard to tell if they would ever do that unless they opened up about it. But more importantly, what are they doing about it, and what are some of the nuances between each of these different organizations? Just to kind of wrap this all up.
Yeah. You know, now that we've looked at all this and kind of painted the picture of what this data is that they're going after, it seems like it's worth a lot more than your typical, like user data. We've got research and financial stuff. So, if like that, let's just look at the QIMR Berghofer. I mean, that's a medical research institute. If that data is their IP for their, malaria trial, and it's really sensitive data, it might be prudent for them to just pay it. It really depends, depending on what the authorities do too. If the FBI or whoever the country's investigative body is can get a hold of the data before you have to pay it. It's kind of a gamble, but that
Mm-hmm.
happens. If you have insurance, cyber insurance makes these decisions a little bit easier for companies. Is cyber insurance will cover you as long as you can show that you did your due diligence to prevent this from happening. That's a major caveat with a cyber insurance business.
It's a CYA. Yeah,
Yeah,
just covers you. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, it makes sense. So it's like, why would we pay for why would we pay for your ransom just because you have insurance if you actually didn't try to protect, right? That wouldn't be smart
Oh
for
yeah,
those
yeah, for
companies. So
sure. I think the other side of the argument is why pay for insurance when you could have paid for the proper security, but that's a different discussion. Sorry.
you're right. I mean, but I think, if we're going to talk about, like, what's going to happen going forward, that's a big one, is we're going to have to start analyzing those angles from more than just a technical perspective, but really from a monetary and business perspective.
It's a cost benefit analysis, just about what we were talking about earlier, classifying your risk and putting and assigning a dollar value to it. It's like one of the first things you learn in security is having that monetary value assigned out, and then getting whatever is your acceptable risk tolerance. What are you willing to lose given the resources you have today if all were to go, you know, under, you know,
Yep.
and then you mitigate that risk so that when the inevitable does happen, because at some point maybe you do get hacked, maybe it's just a blip on the system like it is with ASIC, or if you haven't done your due diligence, you get compromised like Washington State.
Yeah.
All right, Josh. Well, this was super comprehensive. I'm sure that there is going to be more coming out of this story. I don't know if there's going to be any other big like profile names that come out of it, but we'll see. Any final thoughts on this breach?
On this breach, no. I just think it's really cool that we got a new web shell out of it, and I'm gonna, be following that with interest, and it's
Nerd
definitely
out
want to
on that.
see. Yeah, I'm gonna nerd out on that for sure. But I also want to see who else is going to get breached. And I just want to. I know next time we go on our breach report, I really want to talk about CD Project Red's breach because that's a huge one too.
Oh, the yeah, 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 the cyberpunk.
Yep, Cyberpunk and The
Yeah.
Witcher, a producer. Yep, their data was breached, and And we got some new Mac malware coming out, so
It's
next breach report is
true.
gonna be cool.
That's true. We have more in store for all of you. Well, if you do like us, this content, and you want to see us create more of this content, like, subscribe, and comment below. That's how the algorithms work. And until next time, we'll see you in the next breach report.